Welcome to AI Alternative Intelligence, a podcast brought to you by Data2X. Each episode, we'll be talking to guests who will help us to learn, to question, also to be inspired by what's possible when we focus on equity in innovation, especially around AI. I'm your host, Anand Verghese, and I'm really excited to welcome this week's guest, Ginette Azcona. She's a researcher, a data scientist, a policy specialist at UN Women, and in fact, she'll soon be taking on a role at the New School in New York City. Welcome, Ginette.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Yeah, in fact, why don't we start there? I'd like to kick off our conversation with your own career journey, which I think provides a bit of an important backdrop to the topics we'll be discussing today. As I mentioned, you've had a long, distinguished career in the UN system. You're most recently in the UN Women, where you focused on quantitative research, on data, but you're also in the midst of a pretty big career change. As of September 15th, if I understand it correctly, you'll be taking on a role at the New School. Tell us a little bit more about that work at the UN and also what you're going to be tackling in your new role, because I think that reflects some sort of broader trends and gaps that we're seeing in the sector.
Great. No, thanks for the question. Yes, really exciting times. A big change for me, in fact. I was at UN Women for 15 years, within the UN system for much longer, and really enjoyed my time there. At UN Women, I led our global efforts to monitor progress on gender equality under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including as the lead author of our flagship report, Progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, the Gender Snapshot. It's our flagship report that we produced annually that looked at all of the SDGs, all 17, from a gender equality perspective. Are we reaching these goals, and are we reaching them specifically for all the women and girls around the world? And I did that work by partnering, by collaborating with other folks, with the ILO, with the World Bank, with UN Habitat, with UNICEF, you name it. And it was really about, what is the data that we need? Why don't we have it, and how do we get it? How do we get that gender data? What is a new analytical lens that we can use to analyze that data, to draw in new insights? How do we combine that data with other data to make sure that women in all their diversity are being reflected in the analysis of who is being left behind, how and why, and more importantly, how do we change that? So really, as you can tell, hopefully, I am very passionate about that work and want to bring that to the work that I do at the New School. And that is what I'm hoping to do with this new initiative. My role will continue to drive that mission by bridging the divide between social scientists who are committed to many of these issues and folks working on artificial intelligence, right? This new way of drawing out knowledge and insights from data. The way that we're doing that is with a new lab. It's called the People's AI and Data Lab and the Chi Network. And it's really about creating a space for interdisciplinary research, a space where social scientists, especially women, especially Global South researchers, can connect and collaborate with AI and machine learning experts to co-create ethical and inclusive, impactful research, AI-powered research. The goal is to democratize, right, access to these tools, to amplify underrepresented knowledge, and ensure that emerging technologies are actually serving the people and communities they're meant to benefit, right? Making sure that these new advances are, of course, making profits for some of these tech companies, because I know that is what they're aiming to do. But at the same time, that they're being used for human progress, for social impact, for social good. And that is not just a slogan, but that really it is truly what is being done with this new, with these new tools. And the way that you do that is through collaboration, is through coalitions, through building spaces for these unlikely but very powerful coalitions to drive meaningful change. And as I said, I've had a lot of really fruitful experiences in the past doing that, and that's what I hope to bring with this new role.
That sounds really exciting. It sounds like a sort of natural transition.
Hmm.
I want to dig into the conversation about stakeholders and bringing them together. Before we do that, I want to drill down a little bit on this topic of AI
Hmm.
becoming a tool for sort of human flourishing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, you talked about this. I think a lot of the conversation around AI right now has this tone of a race towards
Hmm.
better profit, a race towards greater geopolitical advantage, perhaps.
Hmm.
Um, and that may be important, but it might obscure also, I think, conversations and questions around how do we make these tools um, engines of human empowerment, human economic benefit, health,
Hmm.
etc.
Hmm.
What's stopping us from doing that? I mean, what
Hmm.
are the main challenges that you see at this point?
I think it's power inequalities, right? Who are the folks that are driving this? It's folks who, as we just talked about, largely, are interested in maximizing profit, who are largely talking about the value of these advances in terms of markets, right? In terms of GDP growth and seeing, I've heard, some of these interviews from some of these CEOs in terms of an inflection point for GDP growth. Wonderful. But we in the development world since the 90s have been talking about the wealth of nations as really the people, right? It's about human development. And unfortunately, as I said, we're kind of over here and they're over here. And how do we get them to talk to each other and making sure that they're working together to identify priorities that are in sync, right? Growth, GDP growth, economic prosperity is for sure part of the equation, but it can't be at the expense of the planet. It can't be at the expense of people. And it really requires redefining what we mean by value that is going to be brought by these advances. Within the development community, we talk about equity, we talk about sustainability, and we talk about human well-being and capacities, right, of humans. And that's really what needs to be part of the AI conversation. And we need to be talking to these folks as equals. And as I said earlier, we need to be collaborating as equals. We need to be engaged in conversations and engaged in solutions as equals. And that's, I think, what's really stopping kind of that human-centered approach is that we're not talking really together. Yes, we're talking about regulations, about addressing biases, and that is all good. But I think that the engine of growth in this area is still kind of being directed in one way with one objective that is missing this other piece. And that neglect needs to be addressed, right? And that's what I think this kind of effort that we're doing with the new school can hopefully not only bring more visibility to, but also have a real tangible way of addressing, right? With real kind of solutions for how we bridge the gap. As I said, the real solution, the real tangible way of addressing it is by proactively working together, not just talking the talk, but taking actions and looking for those solutions to human problems, human challenges together, and using these new technologies in a way that very truly addresses these problems and is not just superficial. I think a lot of work is happening, but it's happening in kind of these, you know. Kind of piloted, small scaled ways. And I think that there can be more and should be more that's done. And it just needs to be the priority. And
I,
it's,
I love the
mhm.
comment about power disparities. I think when we were speaking earlier, you made a comment about, geography not being destiny.
Mm,
You don't want to have
mhm,
geography
mhm,
be destiny, especially when it comes to AI conversations. Tell me
Mhm,
about the kind of regional disparities in power
mhm,
that you have either encountered or you're sort of looking at as you
mhm.
enter this new field. How can we overcome them? I mean, I know you're part of the UN system, which by definition is trying to sort of um, bring lots of voices, lots of reasons to the table. What have you learned there that we might bring to this new conversation?
Yeah. No, I think that that really is something that also needs to be, talked about and talked about a lot more, right? Is that we are seeing these advances being clustered in certain places, right? In Silicon Valley, right? They have access to each other. They're going on coffee dates with each other. They're going on, dinners with each other and talking about ideas, networking, planning, and developing projects together. And anybody who's not, a next door neighbor or just right around the corner is not going to have that kind of proximity and that kind of access. That shouldn't be the way that opportunity. That shouldn't be a deciding factor as to whether you have a voice and can participate in this AI revolution. How do we shift that? We need to shift that, and we need to shift that by making sure that we open up the spaces for those kinds of opportunities, that we recognize the value of diverse voices, and that we democratize the access to these tools and to these partnerships, and that we're intentional about it. It's not going to happen just because we wish it. Right? It's not going to happen just because we think it's a good idea and somebody else is going to do it, right? I'm not going to worry about it because somebody else will take care of this, right? What can you do? What is your responsibility? How do you work with others to make it happen? And what is the value, right? What is the value of having diverse groups, contributing to the design and the next generation of these tools? Huge, right? Tremendous value in making sure that women are not only participating in equal way in the design of these AI solutions, but that they have a role in their governance and their leadership. That folks from different parts of the world also have again a role, a participatory role, but also a leadership role, and doing so requires. As what we're trying to do, right? A space for that to happen, right? Looking for ways to proactively encourage those kinds of collaborations to take place online, if not in person, right? We're not going to necessarily move these researchers at all to Silicon Valley, but can we bring them closer together by creating this virtual space for them to connect? And that is what the Kai Network is trying to do. It's saying, put in your contact information like you would it in LinkedIn, for example. Tell us what you're looking for, who you're trying to connect, what idea you have, and what you need to make that idea happen. And the platform will do the rest, right? It'll help you to find those connections to make that idea happen, make that idea a reality. And location doesn't matter, right? If that person that you want to connect is in South Africa, or if that person happens to be in New York or in California, that doesn't matter, right? The work can happen. And actually, maybe many, many more opportunities will be available than they would otherwise if you were just stuck to only being able to collaborate to the people that were right next to you or
Yeah.
in your city. And that's really powerful, right? You go from having, 10 different ideas being possible and being, at your, being accessible, right? Because they were in your, vicinity to hundreds, thousands, right? That you might be able to get access to because now they're in this platform and there's a smart matching mechanism for them getting to you, because that is what the Kai Network. Without going into all of the details, I encourage your listeners to go to our website kai.network to learn more. But that is the idea, right? Is that with this platform, we encourage people to connect and to build those connections, and geography doesn't matter anymore, and it shouldn't.
That's really exciting. And we will add those kinds of details to the show notes to make sure that our listeners can get to some of these resources that you're talking about. I want to drill down a little bit on a point that you just made about articulating the value of diversity.
Mm.
Is it, I want to test a hypothesis, is it that industry hasn't heard enough about the value or doesn't understand enough about the value of diversity?
Mm.
Or is it that they have been actively resistant to that point? And that this sense of acceleration and that tone of the race that I talked about earlier is allowing them to sort of willfully ignore that point. It's a slightly provocative way of asking the question: how do we get industry to pay attention to the value that you might articulate at a place like the New School?
Yeah, I think we're in a very difficult, and we have to be transparent about it, right? I think that um, there's a challenge right now where I think that for some period, too short of a period, there was an interest in having more diversity, in promoting more women, for example, in the workplace, and more women in positions of power. But there's been a shift, right? There's definitely a clawing back and a backlash on gender equality and women rights in many parts of the world. There's a concern among many of these tech companies that any um, strong focus on DEI will result in political backlash, and you are then seeing a kind of a clawing back in that as well, right? And so despite the value, there is a shift that's happened, which is unfortunate, because I think that the value of having different folks contributing to the discussion, to the development of this technology, is unquestioned, right? It is valuable. It is important, for profit, for ideas, for impact. You want to make sure that you're not missing out on the next really big idea. But if you're leaving certain people out of the conversation, that is exactly what you're doing, right? And so we're really trying to combat that, right? To say, no, we're going to be really pushing against that and saying that this needs to be revisited. This needs to be something that we push against, and show that not only but through the kind of human rights principles that, of course, I have been advocating as through my work at UN Women, but very importantly for those that are interested in profit and the profit margin, by saying, and look at what happens when you do, when you open up the space. Look at all these amazing ideas. Look at all of this potential that you're missing out on because you're not opening up the space for all of these different folks to contribute. So I think we have to show the value. And I think that, again, it's through these kinds of platforms, these online, transparent, open, diverse platforms that we're able to do that, right? To show different stakeholders, not only the private sector, but government actors as well, that this is good for business, right? This is not only a human rights argument, this is good for business, and this is good for society as a whole. But that is what we're trying
Yeah,
to
that all does that
do.
that rings true, and also it sounds to me like the New School could be a really great forum for that conversation. I want to go back a little bit to earlier parts of your career, because you've been a huge champion of gender data, as you
Mm,
mentioned in
mhm,
the sort of early part of this conversation. Data to X, of course, gender data is close to our hearts.
mhm.
What is the role of gender data, as far as from your perspective, in advancing this more equitable, human-centered future, especially around AI?
Yeah, no, it's vital, honestly. As I was saying earlier, we need to make sure that these tools are being trained and being formed by data that are not biased. Although that's hard to say because, of course, everything is biased, but that we're acknowledging those biases and addressing them. The other thing that really I want to emphasize is that because the work that's happening right now is really focused on quantifying kind of the biases embedded in these data, and raising concerns of how these are then encoding kind of biases, right? And amplifying them even further. I also want to raise the concern about the invisible piece, right? That if you don't have the data, right? If you don't have the disaggregated data by sex, if you don't have, because oftentimes what we're focusing on is kind of the biased social norms that are embedded in the data and how then those are kind of proliferated in kind of the responses that you get from ChatGPT and things of that nature, right? That is something that we are concerned about. We need to raise, red flags about. But the other piece that is a little bit more kind of techie is the fact that a lot of the data that goes into a lot of the things that we do is gender blind. Right? It's not disaggregated by sex. It doesn't have information on race, ethnicity, disability, LGBTQI, et cetera, et cetera. And so making sure that we also bring visibility to the biases that oftentimes are invisible. I talked earlier about kind of just even the perspectives that are kind of in terms of the value, right, that we have in society. Do we care more about profits or do we care more about, irrespective of the cost? And is that what we're using to frame these foundational models, or do we want to ingrain in them a perspective that focuses on a much more holistic idea of human of development, right? That does look at kind of people, planet, and prosperity, and those are the kinds of things that I think also need to be factored in, and that's why these kinds of data matter, right? Gender data, intersectional data, but also the perspectives of indigenous communities, for example, that oftentimes are just not even part of the discussion at the moment, right? How do they define, for example, our natural resources, right? Indigenous communities in many parts of the world talk about them as much more than commodities, right? As sacred resources. Imagine if when you ask ChatGPT, what is water? It went beyond kind of, the mainstream definition and it said, it's a sacred resource and you have a responsibility, to protect it, right? It's, your ancestor, et cetera, et cetera. This is the kind of thing that I think we need to, and this is why diverse voices matter, right? Imagine if you had, different kinds of data, different kinds of information informing these models and the value for all of us that would bring. So you can have me talk about this for a very long time.
I can
But
tell.
I think that this is why we need these different, folks, these different people working on different issues, being part of the conversation, talking to some of these, developers and bringing these insights to the table, right? Because oftentimes the conversation just hasn't even, happened, right? It's not so much that, kind of folks working on some of these foundational models want them to be, kind of closed-minded or biased or et cetera. It's just that these are not even things that people have kind of connected the dots about because, as I said, we're kind of working kind of in isolation, but would be very much open to it, right? So how do we create that space so that they can be open and can have those conversations? Let's do it.
I know that partnerships have been a huge part of your career. You spoke about it a lot
Mhm.
already. You're coming out of the multilateral system, you're going into academia. Tell me a little bit about each of those systems, each of those kind of stakeholders, and what role they can play in building these multi-stakeholder coalitions today. What are you hoping will be different about the multi-stakeholder experience
Right.
as you go into academia from say your time at the UN?
Hmm. Hmm. Collaboration is essential. It really is. I think it's essential because it is, I think, to me, what unlocks kind of scale, right? Scalability.
Hmm.
If you're doing things just in the private sector or just with government or just within the UN system or just with academia, then that's where it's going to stay, right? So how do you, and I'll give you an example, right? I'm going into the new school. I'm going to be working much more kind of fully with researchers, oftentimes in academia. How do I make sure that the insights, that the knowledge that they're building doesn't just stay in academia, doesn't just stay in this, journal that's read by 30 people, that is very prestigious, great, but that isn't, reaching policymakers. That's also part of the work that we're trying to do is figuring out how to make sure that as part of this incentivizing collaborations, that it's with, policymakers, with practitioners, with developers, with the private sector, so that it's all kind of sectors that matter, kind of being influenced, right, by these transformative thoughts, ideas, and that the action is, and then the solutions that come from this is really being embedded into all of these different spaces, right? For me as well, I think part of the reason that the report that I led for so long at UN Women was so successful was that it wasn't kind of a dry, 300-page report. It had infographics, galore. It was really meant to reach non-technical audiences, right? It was very robust technical research, but presented in a very accessible way for policymakers, for non-technical audiences. And so that is what we're also trying to achieve with this, right? How do we tell stories from these collaborations that transcend kind of academia? Is going to be part of it. How do we organize convenings, right, at the national level that again is not just kind of sitting in these AI summits in New York and Geneva and California, but that are happening all around the world, but also at the regional level, also at the global level, and that they're multi-sectoral, right? Where we're bringing governments, private sector, academia, the nonprofit world together, right, to learn about these new insights and to think about what that means for them and their work. And we have examples of how this can work, right? And the impact that it can result. So I'm very excited about this and look forward to be able to document. And that's the other part of the work, right? So for a long time, I've really focused on numbers, and so as part of this work, it's how many collaborations have we been able to support? What has been the outcome of those, the impact, and let's quantify it. Let's really show the success of these and tell that story. And if it's not working, why isn't it working, right? So what were some of the failures and what can we learn from them? And I think that has to be part of it, right? Too often we focus on just wanting to tell the good side of things, the positive, and we need to also shift that, I would say. I think as part of this transformation that's happening, we need to kind of look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? There's a lot of risk here as well. There's a lot of opportunity, but there's also, as we know, a lot of potential for harm in some of these new technologies. Let's make sure that we document those as well and that we learn from them and that we quickly adjust and reverse course, right? And that we're working together to identify those early before they do more harm, especially for women and girls, right? The internet can be a really great place for women, but it can also be a place of harm. And so I would say that AI is also something that we have to be mindful of in terms of its opportunities, its risks as well. So yeah, that is kind of part of the big package here is mentoring women, women researchers, supporting them, is collaborating with different institutions, especially those that tend to be kind of overlooked in a lot of the funding, encouraging more collaboration across geographies, as I said, and promoting a lot more intersectoral kind of collaborations for real kind of social impact, real kind of building of knowledge for real action and real social impact.
Yeah, I really like that emphasis on the practical,
Mm,
on transparency, on making things
mm,
accessible. If anything has defined the last decade, it's been um, a real decline in trust in institutions like
mhm,
academia, like
mm,
multilateral institutions. I
mhm.
mean, we talk about vibe shifts. One of the
Yeah.
vibe shifts we've had is that people just don't. We can talk about trust, certainly, but also I don't think many of them feel that these institutions are accessible to them. And
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
I really like your focus on
mhm,
telling stories, being
mhm, mhm,
transparent. When things
mhm,
work, things don't. I think that
mhm,
is going to
mhm.
be at least some piece of rebuilding some of that trust. Um,
You're doing a sorry, just to say you're
yeah,
doing a
please.
disservice to people when you don't tell that story, right? All
Hmm.
of these resources that are going for development, if they're not making an impact, then that's a big problem, right? Because they could be going to something else that could be making an impact, and so we really need to kind of take stock of that, right? Why is there kind of a loss of trust, right? And where can we do better so that the money is going to programs that are making a difference, and that there's an increase in that support to those programs that are making a difference, and that we're letting go of things that are not working and being much more, agile in that, much quicker, and saying, no, that isn't working. And here's why. And maybe this technology can help us in doing that, right? Let's look for ways that this new technology can do that. And I think that there's opportunity there as well. So part of this is also working with practitioners, I should say. Um, but yeah, no, thank you for raising that.
Yeah, no, for sure. We're coming towards the end of our conversation. I wanted to perhaps end uh, with a bit of a pitch from you. If you were
Mm.
in an elevator for 60 seconds with a tech founder, with
Mhm.
a really high level decision maker, what would your pitch be to them about, say, gender data or this kind of more collaborative approach that you're talking about? How would you make that pitch
Mm.
to them?
Yeah, I would say to them that really we need to make sure that we want AI to serve humanity, right? Not just markets. We need to invest now in responsive gender data systems, right? It's not just addressing the biases, but it's also investing in data that we know we currently don't have about women and and the well-being of women around the world, women and girls. So we need to solve that problem as well, right? There's a lot that we don't know, and that remains a really big problem. And they're not going to be part of these foundational models if that data just doesn't exist. And we need to make sure that we're engaging with a diverse kind of global community of researchers working together to solve world problems, right? That you need the infrastructure and then you need the community, and the infrastructure needs to be diverse, and the people that use that infrastructure need to be diverse. And you need to be investing in both, right? Really building up both. So this means building kind of infrastructure, building partnerships, making sure that they're inclusive, and making sure that they're supporting inclusive, ethical AI solutions. That requires kind of intersectional data, as we just said, and it requires kind of collaborative design from the onset. I have well, he's 13 now. I keep forgetting. He's 13, and he's a son, and he's a creative. And he's really worried about AI. He keeps telling me, I'm really worried that it's going to take over, and anything kind of creative and will be kind of AI driven and not driven by people. And so I would also I want to say, that this pitch about making sure that AI serves humanity, that AI serves people's creativity, right? That it's not replacing it, that it's not taking from us what makes us human, but actually enhancing it, right? That it's helping us to be even more creative, even more collaborative, even more connected as a society. Help us to address some of the divisions that is tearing us apart. We need to invest in those kinds of ideas, and I hope that they'll join us in that effort, because that is what we're trying to do.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end on. Certainly one that I agree with. I heard somewhere, some meme, I'm
Wow.
sure. But,
Hmm.
I didn't think the future was going to be where robots are the ones writing poetry and
Oh,
drawing pictures, right? That is, I don't think, the version of human
yeah.
flourishing that we'd envisioned for ourselves when we envisioned sort of AI being part of our
Mhm,
future. So I
mhm,
love that call to action. I love that vision of a more sort of human-centered approach to all of these
mhm,
tools.
mhm,
And I love that you joined us for this early conversation in this
mhm.
podcast. Thank you for your time. Thanks for your insights. Good luck on the next phase of your career journey. We wish you every success.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Really appreciate it.